Okay, hello everyone. Welcome to our community. I'm Deborah Kahn, founder of Being Patient. Welcome to Brain Talks, our talk series where we talk to experts to get questions about answers you're looking for. Today's topic, driving and dementia. It's a sticking point, and honestly, people call me, at least once a month, if not twice a month, friends saying, hey, when's the right time to take the keys away? So we thought we would go to one of the experts. Welcome Jenny Nordine. She's an occupational therapist, founder of Driving to Independence. Hi, Jenny, and welcome.
Hey, Deborah. Nice to be here. Thanks.
Okay, so this is, like I said, a topic that comes up a lot. When is the right time to take your parents' keys away? Now, let's first start with, how do you assess that? Because we were talking about, in the context of dementia, we can talk about age too, but just framing it with dementia. Disease presentation is often like this. Some days are good, some days aren't, right? So how do you determine when a person should no longer be behind the wheel?
Exactly, which is a really, really hard decision to make. But we go through a full comprehensive driver assessment, and that really takes place in two situations. In our practice, we do it at the same appointment. We do a clinical assessment and a behind the wheel assessment. So that clinical assessment is really going to focus on the areas of the individual's dementia that could be affecting their driving. So we're really looking at memory, of course, speed of processing, time and judgment of space, prioritization of information, their ability to divide their attention and things like that. We do some basic driving, road sign identification and things like that. Then we're going to go out into our vehicle, and we're actually going to drive or direct the individual through a predetermined route that they must then demonstrate specific skills in order to, to be deemed or to sort of quote pass the exam or pass the assessment. And those are not crazy skills, but they're very common skills that one must be able to do. So,
what are some of the examples of those?
Good idea. So, we're going to look at right turns and left turns, lane changes to the right and left, ability to maintain a speed or be able to be within the range, an appropriate range of speed on the speed limit and things like that. Managing lots of pedestrians, driving through a parking lot, those sorts of skills that one must be able to do. And we're really going to come back, and because, as you said, this condition really can sort of ebb and flow as well as progress over time, we're going to often make a recommendation that somebody come in for a consistency drive. Especially if everything has happened, everything has gone really, really well at the assessment, which is great, but we want to make sure that those good skills are demonstrated consistently over time. So naturally, we tend to make appointments when we know we're at our best. And so if somebody is a morning person, they'll automatically make that appointment for their assessment in the morning. But we want to then schedule that consistency drive later in the day to ensure that those skills carry over throughout the day.
Okay, and so what is your suggestion? Because I think the hardest part is entering into the conversation, right? Saying, Mom, Dad, you can no longer drive. We don't think you should be driving anymore. They haven't had an accident, right? They have, thank God. Hopefully it doesn't get to that point. But how do you even enter into that conversation, especially because driving is so representative of independence. And so it really does feel like you're chopping off their legs.
Sure. Yeah, exactly. And it's interesting to me that, the ability to move about in our communities is so much related to socialization and freedom and independence. And it really doesn't matter if we're 16 or, 76. It really, that's why we are, why we want to be able to drive. And so much of driving is related to our ego. So my suggestion is always making sure that we begin to have that conversation early so that somebody is able to understand the safety aspects of driving and the genuine concern that their family member has related to their ability to drive. So beginning to have those conversations early, maybe when symptoms or signs of dementia or aging are initially identified. And then really begin to put into place, even when somebody is continuing to safely drive, put in place some skills that they may need to maintain that level of independence, even if they're not actually behind the wheel. So a prime example is learning how to potentially use public transportation in their area, or using a shared ride app. This may not be something that our older adults use on a regular basis, but learning how to use that early on in a diagnosis is going to help maintain that level of independence later.
What is the number one sign that you see where a person is no longer should not be driving anymore?
Probably memory. So, memory is so prevalent within the, this diagnosis and dementia, aging, Alzheimer's disease. Memory will tend to be sort of the original area that we begin to identify. And memory is so involved in driving. And there's a lot of things, we could talk about a lot of specifics as far as, divided attention. If I'm hungry, suddenly now I'm seeing every fast food restaurant on my route. But, memory is important in our immediate memory. What is the speed limit, even though I just passed that speed limit sign? Or, driving along and passing a bicyclist in a bike lane, and then immediately making a right-hand turn because that's your route. You need to turn right at the next traffic light, but forgetting that person on a bicycle was just there and we need to be able to yield to them. The other area of memory is more long-term memory, remembering routes or remembering a destination. Or we may be so tied into a single route from home to the grocery store, but if there's a collision that's closed an intersection or road construction that changes the route, is that person still able to remember to get back home or how to adjust their route? So memory is a really big one because it encompasses so much of what we do when driving.
Is it, I mean, I'm thinking about when you have a cognitive assessment and you take, one of the things given is the clock, right? Test, draw the clock. And the reason why that's so hard is because there's so many layers of information going on and they're not literal, right? So 20 to 2 is not 20, right? So is it the same with driving though? I mean, you do have to think about a lot at one time. Is there a way to make that assessment about whether or not a person has the capacity to think of many things at one time? I mean, is there anything like that? For sure. Rather than just kind of going out there on the road and saying, hey, let's see how you're doing.
Yeah. So there's really a few different, aspects to driving. The first thing is, sort of vehicle control or vehicle operation, which in this group tends to not be an issue at all. The second area is going to be knowledge or recall of rules of the road, which generally is not a problem with this group, although we do see some issues with that. And then the third area is really defensive driving techniques. So those are the three areas of driving that we all have to be able to actively and safely participate in. And it's that defensive driving and rules of the road that we initially, and typically will see be an issue with this group. road. And so remembering the rules of the road, what do I do at a green arrow versus a solid green light, for instance? Or am I able to turn right on this red light at this intersection? But it's also the defensive driving techniques in being able to anticipate what another driver may be doing, even though it's not part of the rules of the road. We all have habits and have to sort of get along with others out there on the road. People with dementia will tend to have a bit of what we would call tunnel vision. And that's not necessarily a visual issue, but rather that they know that they're going to turn left at this upcoming traffic light. And so they just go through and go through that maneuver and forget that they have to yield to oncoming traffic or check a lane or things like that. So there's a lot that go on all at the same time, not just getting from A to B, for instance.
Okay, let me throw this one at you, because this has actually happened in my own family. I mean, my mom is not driving now. She's in a later stage of Alzheimer's, but when she was entering this journey, my sister and I were getting worried. We were like, should she be driving? I mean, she could still drive physically, but we were worried. Once you get a diagnosis, of course, they make you do a reevaluation at the DMV. So we thought, oh, phew, she has to take the written test again. And we think she's going to really struggle, because her memory was going. And I mean, the DMV tests can be quite tricky. They'll ask you how many feet behind an 18-wheeler truck, and you have to remember that, right? And study it and stuff. So we were pretty confident that she wasn't going to pass with the written test. So we thought this was a good way to kind of say, oh, thanks, but, I don't think you should be on the road anymore. You didn't pass the test, or the DMV at least is saying that. Well, lo and behold, she passes. And then what? I mean, the DMV has told her basically she's okay to drive. They will require her to get reevaluated, on a regular basis. But quite frankly, we were worried about her driving. We thought she was getting panic attacks. That was what we were worried about. It was like this kind of heightened anxiety in the car. It wasn't her ability to drive, but it was that heightened anxiety where we thought, if you're so anxious, you're probably like opening the door to having an accident.
Yeah. Well, and in fact, when we look at a list of things that a family member might begin to question whether or not somebody's able to safely drive, is that heightened anxiety. So sometimes what people will say to their spouse or adult children is, you know what, I'm just exhausted after I drive these days and I don't understand why. Well, it's that anxiety that they're experiencing. Or I had 2 people honk at me when I was out driving today, and I just don't understand why. And so those are absolutely signs that we see. The problem between, I'm going to say the difference, let's not create a problem, but the difference between a comprehensive driving assessment with a certified driver rehab specialist versus the motor vehicle department is that the motor vehicle department is very black and white, right? If you pass this test, that's all we need to do. Or if you can demonstrate that you can parallel park or go around the block, you're good to go. But a specialized comprehensive assessment, which we would consider a functional assessment, is much more in-depth and going to be able to identify a lot of the areas that you're addressing, or that you and your mom needed to consider. Is this, the fatigue level that somebody is experiencing, or the being able to drive outside of one's normal driving patterns. One of the things that we'll often do when we go out to somebody's home, as I, gave this example about, is somebody able to remember to get home? We will ask them to drive to 3 or 4 or 5 common destinations that they may want to go to, which is great. But at some point during that route, we will say, hey, you have to turn right at this next traffic light. We're going to pretend that there's a collision ahead and this road is blocked. And so now can you find the route either home, because really that's where you're safe, or to the next destination that we're looking for. So that's really the essence of why a comprehensive driving assessment from a specialist can be to somebody's advantage, because now we're identifying that these are issues, or that they are still safe to be driving.
Is there a pattern? I mean, you must, with your company, you must see a lot of people who are facing this. Is there a pattern? Like, can we make any kind of general assumptions that if you're in a middle to late stage, you probably shouldn't be driving, of dementia? Is there any pattern that you could actually kind of say in general?
Yeah, I think that in general, what we want to start to look for are external signs of difficulty in driving. So this level of anxiety, for instance, that we talked about, or even as a passenger, if you get into the vehicle with your spouse who has a diagnosis and they forget to put their seatbelt on, again, those are sort of early signs. Or that we can identify different dings or dents on the vehicle itself. Clearly being pulled over by law enforcement, we sometimes will get referrals, through that avenue. Or, having difficulty backing out of the driveway or backing out of a parking space. Those are all signs now that driving really, that privilege of driving probably is really coming to an end at this point, because we've got these very physical external signs.
Okay, let's leave dementia out of this. Is there an age, do you think, that people should just stop driving?
No, that's a great question. I've been doing this for 22 years, and I can tell you that I have seen plenty of people in their mid-60s who should not be driving, because we all age so much differently.
I mean, and mid-60s isn't even that old, though.
It isn't. I know. Let me tell you, the older I get, the younger it becomes. But I've had other folks in their 80s that are doing just fine. So just like adolescents mature at different rates, right? We can see that in our children or grandchildren. We age at different rates as well. And so, some of that's a function of lifestyle, some of that's a function of health and heredity and those sorts of things. But I have absolutely seen folks in their mid-60s that unrelated to a dementia diagnosis that do not demonstrate the ability to drive, and older adults who are doing great.
So who are the bulk of the people? Like, how do people get to your organization? Is it usually the children who are coming and saying, please assess, or, what is the road?
So, if we look at our practice overall, we're really seeing everybody along that lifespan spectrum. We see kids with autism, and on the spectrum, we see people that have had brain injuries or strokes or spinal cord injuries. And then, of course, we see the aging adults with dementia. But the vast majority of the referrals that we get are either from family members or from physicians when we're talking about this dementia or aging adults. You're absolutely right. We get phone calls from adult children that just say, I'm not sure my dad should be driving, but I don't want to have to make that decision. And that's fine. That's really a role that we take on to make sure that, number one, it's an objective assessment, that we're looking at a wide variety of things that can affect somebody's ability to drive, or helping them with sort of remediation or skills that they may incorporate that will maintain a level of independence longer, as well as the fact that if this individual is not safe to be driving, now that's a conversation that I'm having with him versus his daughter, because that's a really difficult position to put an adult child in, because that can really disrupt sort of that family unit. Now dad's mad at that person versus me. And at the Thanksgiving dinner table, it's okay to be mad at me because of this loss of independence, but I really want to make sure that family unit is intact.
Yeah, amen to that. Like that's been our family, is like, and I get it. It's hard. Like if you're, if your child is telling you you can no longer drive anymore, it's humiliating. It
Yeah.
signals a loss of independence. You can't do anything, right?
Yeah.
Anymore. And I get it, but it's a really, really difficult position to be in that a lot of us are in, you know?
Exactly. Yeah.
We're getting a question from Roseanne, who's watching, and she said, driving is very important to my husband, and he's not going to want to stop. I fear that it would trigger a faster decline in his Alzheimer's. What do you think of separating city driving from expressway driving? Also, I'm in Virginia. Are there any people in my area to do this type of driving assessment? So great question.
Absolutely.
Let's tackle the first part, city versus freeway.
Yeah, that it really has to do again with the skills that this person has maintained. So in some ways, expressway driving is easier because people aren't slowing and turning, or traffic isn't coming in and traffic lights aren't changing and things like that. If you're in the flow of traffic, there aren't quite as many decisions to be made. The problem is that when a decision has to be made, it happens quickly because of the speed of traffic. City driving, although it could be a bit slower, there's just a lot going on and a lot of distraction. So I'm not sure necessarily that restricting somebody to only city driving is necessarily going to keep him safe. Now, with regard to other evaluators that do the exact same thing that I do, I would really encourage people to look at the member locator on the website. So our professional organization is called the Association for Driver Rehabilitation Specialists, and their website is A as in Apple, D as in dog, E as in Edward, D as in dog.net. So it's ADED.net.
We can post that in the in this website.
Yeah.
In this conversation.
Okay, yeah. And on there they have a member locator, and then you can search by location and things like that. So there are absolutely folks in Virginia. Good ones.
So how does it work? If people come to you and you give kind of a third-party assessment, and you're like, okay, this person definitely shouldn't be driving anymore. Do you hand that recommendation to the DMV? How does that all work?
That really differs by jurisdiction. So, in Virginia, as our example, it could be very different. But here in the state of Arizona, which is where our main office is, we require a prescription from a medical provider. And then our medical review program of our motor vehicle department has a form that needs to be submitted in order to either clear somebody to drive following a diagnosis, or to discontinue their driving privileges as well. So our documentation goes both to the prescribing provider as well as the motor vehicle department. And to the provider, we send that form, and then the doctor or nurse practitioner, whomever, completes that form and forwards it on to motor vehicle, and then their process goes from there. But that differs quite a lot between different jurisdictions. So we'd have to figure that out in the specifics.
Okay, and you mentioned earlier the share, the Lyfts and the Ubers, the shared rides. The problem, though, I think with a lot of elderly people is they're not great on their cell phones, right? And so they rely on their kids, and which is fine if you're free and available, if mom or dad wants to go somewhere. So go through what the alternatives are for people who can no longer drive. And, granted, it's really different if you're in New York City where you can walk and everything's in, around the block, right?
Mm-hmm.
But if you are in a suburb where, my mother-in-law lives in a suburb where you have to drive everywhere. She has to drive like a couple miles to go to the grocery store,
Sure.
And if you're in a rural area, you have to drive even further. So what are some of the solutions out there for people who, no longer can drive anymore?
Right. So interestingly enough, the shared ride apps have evolved and have taken on this issue as well. So it used to be that you had to be standing someplace where you wanted to be picked up when you requested a car and things like that. The apps have evolved in that I can request a vehicle or a ride for somebody at a different location at a specific time. So you're absolutely right that it does become a little bit more complicated if I'm needing to arrange that ride. But it is possible to do. Again, that's why we want to make sure that folks are learning these apps when, early on in this process. The other thing that I often will recommend to family members is setting aside a specific time for this individual to run errands or make appointments and things like that. As adults, we don't want to have to ask for help. And so if I say to my family member, do you know what, at 2:00 every Wednesday, I'm available for anything that you need to get done, they just know that that's their dedicated time with me. And I'll drive them on whatever errand or whatever appointment or out to lunch or whatever it might be. And so they're not having to ask me for help each and every time. So sometimes that's just sort of a nice way to be able to bridge that level of dependence. The other thing is that my father may not want me to come along to some social event that he wants to participate in his social group. And so making sure that we've got folks that, in the community, in those social groups are also quite willing to give a ride or pick somebody up and things like that. Just like, my father would be happy to provide a ride to somebody as they need to as well. So, tapping into some of those resources are helpful as well.
Yeah, a friend of mine calls it a care friend, which I love that term.
Yes.
She's like, we need to coin the term care friend, because also socialization is one of the best things you can do for both elderly and dementia, right? And so the opportunity to spend time with others, is a great value.
Right. Exactly. And we don't, the person that commented earlier from Virginia, she sort of mentioned that she was concerned that this lack of independence would affect her husband's, progression and things like that. And there is research around that about needing to make sure that those social connections are maintained, because it does affect the progression of dementia.
Yeah, not taking away the car, more just the isolation. Right?
Exactly.
So that's why the kind of care friend, I think, is a wonderful thing. It's a
great idea. Yeah.
So, how do people know? So you would suggest, I'm just trying to kind of summarize here. You would suggest don't challenge your parents yourself. Find a third party like your organization to say, I will do an independent assessment, because then it takes you out of the conversation. Is that right?
Right, exactly. And if you are going to have a conversation, even the conversation of bringing up an assessment can be hard as well. And so really focus on the fact that you're concerned about their safety, not that they're a bad driver, but rather, we want to make sure that you're safe out there when driving as well. And it's also important to have those conversations at home, not when they're driving. That can be, a really difficult position to put everybody in if that, again, that anxiety goes up and things.
Yeah, absolutely. Absolutely. It's like, we've all been through this, I think you hit a certain age and then it's like, oh my God, should mom or dad still be driving, And so grateful that there are organizations that exist like yours. Tell us which states you're in or what locations so people know.
Yeah, so our main office is in the Phoenix metro area in Tempe, Arizona, and then we have one dedicated therapist down in Tucson, Arizona, and then we have a third location with a dedicated OT practitioner in Albuquerque, New Mexico.
Okay, so does your organization kind of keep people driving as well, or is it basically an assessment?
Absolutely. No. That's a great way to sort of, let people know. My company is called Driving to Independence. Our goal is not to take away that independence at all, but make sure that people are independent as long as they can be. The fact is that some folks have outlived their ability to drive. And as we age, we all change some of the habits that we have or the tasks that we do. We may pick up throw rugs out of the bathroom to make sure we don't slip as well. So this this is just one of those things. But absolutely, if there is a way that we can adjust somebody's driving skill or their techniques, or reduce where they're qualified to drive and things like that, that's absolutely the ultimate goal, is to keep somebody driving as long as possible.
So
And
how long,
reassessments, yeah.
how frequently would they need to go to see you?
Well, we do reassessments probably annually for a whole group of folks. That really is a much better judgment to be made through the medical provider, simply because they know how fast the dementia is progressing. So, sometimes we've got probably 3 or 4 folks in our practice that we reassess every 6 or 9 months. And then there's other people that we're, reassessing annually or every other year. So that's really, it comes from the provider more than us necessarily. We might come up with a general recommendation, but it's best from the provider.
Is there a resource, an organization, association out there where people could use as a resource if they're not in the area that Driving to Independence is?
Well, that's really where I would refer somebody back to the ADED website, so that they can find very similar programs across the country.
Great. Okay. Thank you so much, Jenny Nordine. This is such an important topic. And thank you for sharing your expertise. It's super helpful. I know even for me, facing, taking the keys away hasn't been an easy experience at all. So, we really are grateful for your expertise.
Great. Happy to be here. Thanks so much, Deborah.
And we'll post, I think Katie's already posted in the comment section, the link to Driving to Independence. Okay. So if anyone out there wants to get in touch, you'll know how to.
Happy to.
All right, great. So if you missed any of this interview, we'll repost it on beingpatient.com. Don't forget to sign up for our newsletter. Our newsletter is when we tell you about upcoming talks like this one. Thanks everyone for watching. Have a great weekend.